Have you ever been loved so loudly it drowned out your instincts? Maybe someone once gave you everything, just to quietly take everything that mattered. This story isn't just fiction. It's for anyone who's ever second-guessed themselves in the name of love, stayed too long in someone else's idea of who they should be, or smiled through something that felt wrong. If that's ever been you, then this story was written with your name between the lines. The paint on my fingers hadn't dried when the rejection email lit up my phone. Another gallery, another polite decline. Thank you for your submission, Mia. Unfortunately, I didn't bother reading the rest. I wiped my hands on my apron and stared at the canvas in front of me. Half a woman's face, eyes closed, mouth stitched shut with gold thread. It was too honest. That was probably the problem. I lived in a fifth-floor studio with peeling windowsills and a stubborn radiator that coughed all winter. Rent was due in 4 days. My bank account had the warmth of a snow globe. I told myself I was fine, had been for years, scraping by, selling custom portraits to strangers online, dodging calls from my mother who always asked why I didn't just paint something cheerful for once. I didn't expect anything from that night. I barely wanted to go. My friend Jaya had begged me to come to her birthday dinner at some trendy rooftop restaurant I couldn't pronounce. I almost said no, but the idea of free dessert and maybe a glass of wine I didn't have to pay for won out. I wore my best black jeans, and the only blouse I owned without paint stains. It felt like stepping into a world where I didn't belong. That's where I saw him, Daniel. He was already seated when I arrived. Tall, well-dressed, all sharp lines and polished charm. The kind of man who looked like he lived in airports and answered calls with, "Let's circle back." I avoided eye contact. Nasong tact. People like him didn't notice people like me. Except he did. Halfway through dinner, as I shared a story about a childhood sketch that got me detention, something about drawing our principal as a dictator in a tutu, he laughed first. Loud, clear, not performative. Then he said it. "You look like someone who turns pain into masterpieces." It was the way he said it, not as a compliment, as a discovery. Like I'd been waiting to be seen and he'd just adjusted the lens. I blinked, unsure if I should thank him or tell him to mind his business. But instead, I smiled. That night, he added me on Instagram. I hesitated before accepting. His grid was all yachts, cityscapes, and quotes about hustle. Not my scene, not even close. But curiosity won. The next morning, flowers arrived at my doorstep. Lavender and peonies. My favorites. I hadn't told anyone those were my favorites. A week unfolded like a script I didn't know I was acting in. First came coffee deliveries from my favorite cafe, then a care package, organic migraine tea, a lavender-scented eye mask, and a note, "For the genius hands that deserve rest." I texted him. "Mia, you're very extra. Daniel, you're very worth it." I laughed to myself, but my stomach fluttered. He didn't ask to see me. He asked to take me somewhere. "A weekend in Murray," he said. "The snow's coming early this year. You need to see it." "I don't do spontaneous romantic getaways with men I barely know," I replied. He said, "I'm not asking for a getaway. I'm offering snowfall on your eyelashes. Come be an artist in a painting for a weekend." He was good with words. I was bad at resisting poetry. The hotel was tucked between evergreens, the kind of place influencers tagged in their filtered love stories. A fireplace crackled in the suite. He'd packed hot chocolate, cashmere scarves, and a book I'd once mentioned I loved in a passing comment. He noticed everything. I'd dated men who forgot my last name when introducing me to their friends. Daniel? He quoted my captions back to me like gospel. I told myself I wasn't falling. I was still watching, still cautious. But that night, in front of the fireplace, as snow dusted the windows like powdered sugar, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek and whispered, "Forever feels easy with you." My heart stuttered. It should have run, but it didn't. Instead, I whispered, "This feels too much." He pulled me closer, fingertips light on my spine. That's what love should be. It was overwhelming, and in that moment, I mistook the flood for depth. He made me feel seen. No, witnessed. As if every scar I'd hidden beneath paint had a place in his arms. I wanted to believe it was real. that someone could fall for me, not despite the mess, but because of it. So when he kissed me, I let the world blur. I quieted the voice in my head that warned me this was too fast, too precise, too polished to be pure. And maybe that's how love bombs work. They don't explode. They cradle you in sweetness. They fill you oh much. You don't notice the air leaving the room. You don't notice you've stopped breathing. Not until it's too late. The mornings became too easy. There was a time I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing with past due notifications, the rattle of neighbors dragging their lives through thin walls, and the dull ache of not knowing how I'd afford groceries. But now, I woke up in silk sheets, cradled by light pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows, to the smell of fresh espresso, already brewed. Daniel had timed the machine. "So your first thought of the day smells like being loved," he said once. At first, I was grateful, or at least I told myself that. We went to brunch spots that didn't list prices on menus. We wore matching watches. He surprised me with a new phone, a wardrobe full of dresses I'd never dare try on myself. "Just because you're beautiful," he whispered, handing me a box with shoes that cost more than a month of my old rent. I argued once, about the phone, I think. He kissed my forehead and said, "Let me take care of you. Why do you always flinch when someone wants to give you something?" I didn't know how to answer that. I'd spent so long earning love by shrinking myself, I forgot what it felt like to receive it without debt. Except, that wasn't what this was. It started small. "Why are you still working at that cafe?" he asked one morning, his voice dipped in concern. "You don't need to anymore. You should be focusing on your art. That's your gift." It sounded kind. Like belief in me. I'd dreamed of quitting for years. The cafe was a pit stop, never the destination. I hesitated. "It gives me structure," I said. "And rent." He laughed. "I'll handle the rent. Don't insult your talent with survival jobs." I gave notice the next week. The first few days felt like flying. I painted longer, stayed up later, explored ideas that once scared me. He'd peek into the studio and smile. "I love watching you work," he'd say. "You're intoxicating when you're in flow." I soaked in every word like sunlight. But then, the clouds. One afternoon, I was texting Jaya, just catching up, laughing about something stupid we'd done in college, when Daniel walked by, paused, and said, "What are you two talking about so much lately?" I blinked. "Just life stuff." He nodded, then asked for my phone. "Let me see." I hesitated. That was mistake one. His smile thinned. "Why not?" "It's private," I said, trying to keep my tone soft. I wasn't hiding anything. It was just the principle. He didn't raise his voice. That would have been easier. Instead, he placed the phone back on the table like it burned him and said, "I thought we didn't need walls between us." I ended the conversation with Jaya the next day. Slowly, I started responding less. She asked if something was wrong. I told her everything was perfect. It wasn't a lie. Not yet. Then came the art. I posted a painting on my page, a broken violin, its strings fraying, its sound bleeding into the canvas. It was about grief, about the years I'd wasted begging men to hear me. The caption was a single line: "Even music needs mercy." That night, Daniel didn't say a word over dinner. Not one. Just silence and silverware. When we got home, he finally spoke. "That painting," he said slowly. "Are you unhappy?" I looked up, startled. "No, of course not." He tilted his head like inspecting something. "Gee, under glass." "Then why paint that?" I stammered. "It's not about you." His eyes snapped to mine. "Then who is it about?" There was no correct answer. Not really. The moment stretched, taut and quiet, like the breath before thunder. I folded the napkin in my lap, fingers trembling. "It's just art." He scoffed. "You keep saying that like it means something." The next day, he gifted me new canvases, Bright pastels, cheery landscapes, flowers. "Paint something happy for once," he said. "You're not broken anymore." It was a command dressed in ribbon. That night, I sat in my studio staring at the empty canvas. The pastel colors mocked me. I dipped my brush in the blue and painted nothing. The silence in the room felt like static against my skin. I missed the cafe. Not the work, the noise, the humanity. I missed people who didn't track my moods by brushstroke. I missed being able to cry without being interrogated for the cause. But when I looked at Daniel sleeping, peaceful and proud, I told myself I was lucky. He loved me. He chose me. No one else had ever done that without wanting me smaller, quieter. Except he wanted that too. He was just more elegant about it. He made his love feel like silk, soft, luxurious, expensive, but wrap it around your wrists and it held all the same. That's when I realized I wasn't adored. I was owned. And I hadn't even noticed the cage closing until I tried to breathe and couldn't. The days blurred. Not in the poetic, dreamlike way people describe when they fall in love. No, this was fog. A soft, silencing haze that crept into the corners of my routine and hollowed them out. I woke up in beds I didn't recognize anymore, surrounded by rose petals and monogrammed linens. My life looked like something you'd see on a luxury lifestyle blog. Every morning brought another gift, another dinner reservation, another glass of wine I didn't ask for, another version of me I didn't recognize. And still, I smiled. Smiled so often, I began to wonder if my face had learned to do it without me. Daniel was everywhere. Not physically. His schedule was packed with client meetings, late-night calls, finance jargon I stopped pretending to understand. But he lived in my phone, my schedule, my breath. He managed everything now. My calendar, my rent, my food deliveries, my silence. The first time he brought up the investment, we were at a rooftop dinner under lanterns he'd had customized with our initials. He poured my wine himself, leaned in close, and said, "There's a new crypto pool opening. Exclusive. Quiet. I can get you in." I blinked, hesitant. I don't really know how any of that works. "You don't need to," he smiled, brushing a curl behind my ear. "That's the point. I'll manage it for you. All you have to do is trust me." Trust. It was always that word. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a test. I felt it in the pause that followed, in the way he held my gaze like he was watching a stock ticker. I offered a soft laugh. Maybe just a small amount. His smile dipped. "After everything I've done for you," he said, not angry but heavy. "You still don't trust me with something this simple?" I panicked. No, I do. I didn't mean it like that. It's all I have left in savings." "Exactly," he said, lifting his glass. "That's why we need to grow it." So I transferred the money. The last of what was mine. It felt like erasing a chalk signature off a wall no one else saw but me. After that, I stopped painting. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just a slump. Creative people went through it, but weeks passed, and the canvases leaned against the wall like accusations. My brushes dried up, the palette knives rusted. Every time I tried to pick them up, my hands stilled. It wasn't just that the spark was gone, it was that I didn't know who I was creating for anymore. Daniel told me to take my time. "You've been through so much, babe. Let yourself breathe." But he said it like a man giving a dog permission to sit. Calls from my mother went unanswered. The one time I picked up during dinner, he sighed so loudly I felt it like a slap. "Do we really need interruptions during our time?" he asked, placing his fork down with precision. "She just wanted to check in," I mumbled. He raised an eyebrow. "I thought I was the one who checked on you now." I said nothing. That silence felt like a stone in my throat. And then, one night, I woke with a jolt. Something cold ran through my spine. Not a sound, but a feeling. An alarm that hadn't been set. I crept into the living room, turned on my laptop, and logged into my bank account. Gone. Another transfer. Not just a few hundred, thousands, to the same investment holding address as before. I stood there, numb, my breath shallow. I hadn't authorized it. I hadn't even been told. The world tilted. When I confronted him the next morning, he didn't yell. He didn't deny it. He didn't even blink. "Don't touch what you don't understand," he said, buttering toast like we were talking about the weather. I stared at him, blinking. "You moved my money without asking." "Our money," he corrected. "We're building something. Don't derail it because you're scared." I didn't agree. "Then say it," he said, voice still calm but now laced with cold. "Say you don't trust me. Say it out loud." My mouth opened, closed. I couldn't. Because if I said it, if I shattered the illusion, I wasn't just accusing him. I was admitting I'd let this happen, that I'd seen the signs and stayed anyway, that I'd traded red flags for red wine and called it romance. Later that night, we argued. Not about the money. By then, that was done. We argued because I cried when he told me I wasn't grateful enough for everything he provided. "You're too sensitive," he said, scoffing. "Every time I try to help you, you twist it." I wiped my tears on my sleeve. I didn't twist anything. He stepped back, shaking his head. "I'm not your villain, Mia." I stared at him for a long time. His jaw, his shoes, his perfectly pressed collar. This man who had built a home from guilt and dared to call it safety. "No," I whispered, my voice steadier than I expected. "You're something else." He didn't ask what. He didn't need to. He'd always known. I learned how to smile without meaning it. Not the fake plastic smile people use in customer service or awkward family dinners. This was different. Softer. Smoother. I learned how to let it reach my eyes just enough. How to let it sit gently on my lips, as if affection lived there. It wasn't surrender. It was camouflage. The fear hadn't left me. It had simply changed form. Less fire, more frost. It curled inside me like a sleeping thing with sharp teeth. I kept it fed, kept it calm, because I needed it to stay quiet while I mapped my way out. He thought he'd won. That's what made it possible. Daniel started calling me his dream girl more often. Sometimes in public, sometimes in bed, sometimes over breakfast while scrolling through market reports. He'd reach over and brush his thumb across my cheekbone and say, "You really are perfect for me. You know that?" And I'd smile. "I know." It was disorienting, how easy it became to agree with him, to lean into the script. I repeated his phrases like mantras. "You're right, babe. You're so good at this. I don't know what I'd do without you." Each time I said them, a different part of me cracked, then healed harder. He let me in more, now that I was obedient. Told me about his clients, his accounts, offshore loopholes that let him play the game like the rich do. I tilted my head and widened my eyes like a student begging for wisdom. "Wow," I whispered one night as he broke down a shadow company structure on a napkin. "I could never do what you do." He smiled like a child who'd been handed a trophy. "That's why I do it for us," he said, tapping the edge of the napkin with his pen. "Because you see the world in color, and I see it in numbers." Inside, I was already sketching floor plans for an exit. I began planting seeds, casual, infrequent, never direct, like soft hands laying bricks while humming lullabies. "Didn't you say I had better credit than you?" I asked one afternoon while we browsed listings for a beach property he was considering. "Wouldn't it be safer to put it in my name?" He paused, thought about it. "Technically, yes, but that's only if we were thinking long-term." I bit my lip, lowered my eyes. "Aren't we?" He kissed my temple and said we'd talk. Later that week, I cooked dinner for the first time in months. His favorite, garlic butter steak and truffle risotto. As he poured wine, I leaned in and murmured, "You're brilliant, babe. Honestly, I wish I understood this stuff like you do." He looked at me like I was the Mona Lisa. From then on, he began involving me more, explaining things, letting me sit in on his video calls, asking for my input only so he could dismiss it with a smirk. I gave him what he wanted, played the pupil. Wow was my favorite word. What he never noticed was the notebook I kept hidden behind my paints, filled with passwords he'd spoken aloud when half drunk, legal terms he'd referenced, account numbers I copied when he left statements open. My art was still on pause, but my mind was sculpting something bigger than a painting. He let me sign things for simplicity, told me to keep track of receipts, let me open a joint account to make things easier. He made it so easy to pretend I didn't know the weight of each step. One night, while we sat by the fireplace in our apartment, his arm draped around me like a crown, he joked, "You're like a mirror, Mia. You reflect exactly what I need." He meant it as a compliment. He didn't realize mirrors can break. I nodded, rested my head on his chest. He smelled like cedarwood and expensive soap. It used to make me feel safe. Now it just made me alert, like the scent of a locked room you can't escape. I remember thinking, he really believes this version of me is real. He believed I needed him, that I wouldn't dare leave because I didn't know how to stand without his hands beneath me. And maybe I didn't, not yet. But I would learn. Every word he fed me, every moment he underestimated me, became a stone in my foundation. He thought obedience meant devotion, that compliance was love, that silence meant submission. He never once imagined silence could be strategy. Because I didn't need to win every argument. I didn't need to be right. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was time. And a smile he'd believe. I learned the rhythm of his ego like a dancer learns choreography. One misstep could shatter the illusion, but if I hit every beat just right, he'd never see the performance for what it was. By now, I knew what delighted him. My wide-eyed admiration, my willingness to defer, the way I leaned into his world with the perfect mix of curiosity and dependence, had become his mirror, his student, his praise singer. And he believed every line I fed him. I was no longer afraid, only focused. We traveled constantly, Turkey, Maldives, Paris, all on his card, of course. "You deserve the world," he said as we clinked champagne glasses on a private yacht off Bodrum's coast. I smiled, pressed my cheek to his, whispered, "Only because you gave it to me." He looked like a god then, so sure of his creation. In Paris, I bought a ring. Emerald cut. Subtle, elegant, exactly the kind of quiet luxury Daniel respected. When the receipt buzzed to his phone, I giggled and clutched his arm. Oops, did I use the wrong card? He looked confused for a moment, then amused. "You're hopeless with this stuff," he said, tousling my hair. "Don't worry, babe, I've got you." I kept playing dumb. Wait, was that supposed to go on the joint account? Are we filing taxes together now, or... I think the transfer bounced. I'll just ask the bank to reroute it to you, unless it's easier to list me. Each question was a thread I let him pull himself. Soon enough, the legal language began. I kept it light, smiled through the phrasing. "You know how the offshore stuff gets complicated? Should we merge the property titles under one clean name? I read somewhere it's safer for dual nationals." I didn't know what half of that meant, but I'd memorized the cadence of words he trusted. He handed me the signed documents without flinching. "Just make sure the accountants get a copy," he said, sipping his espresso. He didn't read them, not once. His signature slid across the pages with the ease of entitlement. I moved slowly, a name here, an asset there, the Maldives villa registered under my LLC. The art investments rerouted through a holding company I quietly structured with an attorney friend from art school, someone Daniel had once dismissed as irrelevant. He never asked about her again. I watched the numbers shift. I watched his accounts thin. And all the while, I kept smiling, laughing at his jokes, stroking his ego. At night, I curled beside him like a warm secret. He never knew he was sleeping next to the architect of his own unraveling. One evening, as we sat on our balcony overlooking the Seine, I watched him scroll through his phone, frustration slowly knitting across his forehead. "Something wrong?" I asked gently. He exhaled. "My primary account flagged something weird. Transfers out of sequence. It's probably the firm. I'll figure it out." I nodded. "Let me know if you need me to resend anything." He kissed my temple. "You're perfect." That was the moment I knew I had him. Entirely. A week later, he stormed into the apartment, something rare for Daniel, whose anger usually wore the mask of polite condescension. This was different. The door slammed, the veins on his neck were visible, his face, tight, pale, drawn. "What did you do?" he spat. I looked up from my book, blinking. "I'm sorry?" "My offshore account, the Paris property, the villa in Gili, they're all in your name now. What the hell did you do?" I closed the book slowly and set it down. "Exactly what you taught me," I said, standing. He stared at me, waiting, for laughter, for an apology, for the mask to drop. Instead, I walked to the dining table, opened a folder I'd prepared days ago, and slid it across to him. "What's this?" "Documentation," I said calmly. "Transaction records, paper trails, some things you probably should have read before signing." He didn't touch it. "You're bluffing." I tilted my head. "Try checking the Paris account." He did. I watched his hands tremble, just slightly, as the screen loaded. I watched the breath leave him, watched the foundation of his certainty begin to crack. Silence wrapped the room. It didn't roar, it hummed, soft and sharp like a violin string pulled just beyond its limit. He looked up, hollow. "You used me." I met his eyes. "You used me first." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He was no longer the man who had orchestrated my dependency, no longer the god who gifted me the illusion of salvation. He was a man staring at the ruins of the kingdom he built, never realizing the queen had learned how to play chess. That silence? That was mine. It didn't need to scream to be powerful. It just needed to be heard. I walked past him, not slowly, deliberately. Every step away was a step back into myself. He didn't follow. He couldn't. Because in that moment, Daniel finally understood. I was never helpless. I was watching. I was learning. And now, I was free. The morning I vanished, it rained like the sky had been holding its breath for years. I didn't leave a message. No goodbye text. No forwarded address. Just the rhythm of water on pavement and the sound of my boots on train station tile. Everything else I carried in silence, thick and necessary. The kind of silence that doesn't beg for understanding. The kind that's earned. I stood on the platform with a single suitcase and a canvas case strapped across my back. My entire life reduced to what I could carry without flinching. My phone was turned off. My number deleted. The SIM snapped in half and flushed hours ago. The air felt different already, quieter somehow, like I had stepped outside a bubble that had been slowly choking me. Behind me, I imagined the apartment waking up. Or maybe not. Maybe Daniel slept in, assuming I was still curled beside him. Maybe he reached out for my hand and found only pillows. Maybe he thought I'd gone for coffee. Maybe he checked his phone to find nothing. No payment notifications, no location pings, no trace of me. He wouldn't understand at first. Not truly. He'd search, start close. The studio probably. My nameplate was gone. The lock changed. The landlord paid off to forget I ever painted there. Then he'd try Jaya. She'd block him. She'd waited a long time for this version of me to arrive. Eventually, he'd go home. Back to the apartment that once felt like a castle and now felt like a mausoleum. That's where he'd find it. The envelope taped to the mirror. It wasn't dramatic. No flames, no broken glass, just quiet intent. Inside, I left him the only thing he'd ever truly notice. A painting. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. He'd recognize the strokes, the palette, the slow bleeding of shadows. It was an empty vault, the hinges rusted, light barely breaking through. Inside, wilted roses spilled from torn velvet, their color drained, their edges bruised. The petals weren't dead, they were exhausted. On the back, written in charcoal, "Now you know how it feels to be empty." That was all. I don't know what he did when he saw it. I like to imagine he stood frozen, reading the line over and over, waiting for it to make him feel something beyond rage. Maybe he shouted, maybe he laughed, maybe he ripped the canvas and blamed the frame. I'll never know. I didn't need to. But I know he screamed. And I know no one heard. The train arrived with a hum and a hiss. I boarded without hesitation, choosing a window seat far enough from the others to keep my solitude intact. The conductor barely glanced at my ticket. I watched the city shrink behind me, glass towers bending in the mist, sidewalks dissolving under the weight of rain. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. It wasn't freedom. Not exactly. It was the space after freedom, the aching quiet when you finally stopped running and realized your breath still belongs to you. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. There was no soundtrack playing in my head, no poetic montage rolling behind my eyes, only stillness. Because liberation isn't loud, it's a clean break in the noise. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and thought about all the things he took without asking: my time, my voice, my softness, my art. He never burned it, never shredded a canvas. He just absorbed it, hollowed it out, called it growth. And I let him for a while. I traded parts of myself for a roof, a rhythm, a false security wrapped in rose petals and accounting language. But I also learned where he kept his weapons. I learned how he disarmed women with kindness before turning silence into a leash. I learned how to make the kind of smile that kept men like him asleep while I dismantled their crowns. And I learned how to leave without dragging chains behind me. They always say revenge is a fire, that it burns everything, including the hand that lights it. But mine wasn't fire. It was frost, precise, quiet, lethal only if you stayed too long in it. Daniel stayed too long. He thought I'd broken. That's what he wanted, a shattered thing to decorate his shelf of rescues. Instead, I became an exit wound. I didn't vanish to disappear. I vanished to exhale. The train curved along the cliffs, the ocean appearing suddenly on the right, gray, infinite, indifferent. I watched a bird ride the wind and disappear into the clouds. It didn't look back. Neither did I. Behind me, fire, even if it didn't smoke. Ahead of me, maybe peace, maybe. And for now, maybe was enough. The studio smelled like lavender and linseed oil again. That was the first thing I noticed, the scent of myself returning. No more luxury candles and scents I didn't choose. No more gold-accented vases that clashed with my palate. This space was mine now, every inch of it. From the soft, paint-splattered apron hanging on the hook to the warm white bulbs that didn't try to flatter but simply told the truth. I had money in my account. Real money. Clean, cold, irreversible transfers. Enough to keep me floating for years, maybe longer. The fridge stayed full. My shoes didn't have holes. My sheets were satin now. Charcoal gray, soft against my skin when I rolled over in the morning. I had drawers for my brushes, cabinets for my paints. Everything had a place. Except peace. That still wandered. I sat before the canvas, brush in hand, and felt nothing. Or maybe too much. It was hard to tell the difference, these days. The last painting had come easy. Rage made my hands move faster than thought. But now, with the storm behind me, I found myself staring into the whiteness of the canvas like it was asking a question I didn't know how to answer. I dipped the brush, touched the surface. The bristles trembled. Not from cold, but from something I couldn't name. I stepped back. Breathed. My fingers felt heavier now. Every stroke held more weight than before. Like they remembered. Like they didn't want to lie. Was this what winning felt like? Because I didn't feel victorious. I felt suspended. Like I'd burned down the house but still smelled smoke in my lungs. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd undone him. Unwound him from the inside, thread by thread. His empire was no longer whole. The headlines were piling up. Financial advisor under investigation for tax fraud. Victim or villain. The rise and collapse of Daniel R. His clients vanished. His license was suspended. His friends stopped tagging him in photos. His family released a 2-sentence statement. We stand by justice. No further comment. I watched it all on my couch, legs tucked under me, tea cooling beside me. The news anchor called him charismatic but careless. A former client said, he always had something to hide. And yet, not a word about me. I was invisible, by design. I left no trail, no confession, no diary full of guilt. Just exits. Just silence. Still, they found me. Not with names, not directly. But the message came through a private DM on a new gallery account I barely used. The profile had no photo, no posts, just one line sent at midnight. You ruined him. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't block them. I didn't reply. I didn't screenshot it for proof or show it to anyone for validation. I just deleted it. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because I refused to explain myself to someone who had only heard his version. The curated tragedy of a man undone, not the slow suffocation of a woman erased. Was it justice? Or was it cruelty? I didn't know. Maybe both. Maybe the two lived closer together than I wanted to admit. He taught me to weaponize softness, to make dependency feel like devotion. I'd learned too well. When I turned it back on him, it didn't feel like vengeance. It felt clinical, like removing rot from a wound. Necessary, brutal, clean. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't change me. Because now, every painting I touched asked the same thing. Who are you without him? And the answer wasn't always kind. Eventually, I picked up the brush again. My hand steadied. I didn't aim for beauty. I aimed for truth. Not the kind that gets sold at exhibitions, but the kind that whispers. This time, I painted a figure. A man in a suit, faceless, smiling. His hand gripped a leash. At the end of it, nothing. The leash hung in the air, limp and unlatched. He looked so sure of himself. I called the piece Permission. When I finished, I stared at it until the room blurred. Then I whispered aloud, just once. He never asked. Not when he moved my money, not when he rewrote my routines, not when he held me up as proof of his generosity while chipping away at my voice. And I never gave it. Now, I didn't need to reclaim it. I'd buried it in the silence he once thought was loyalty. Paint on my fingers again, my breath steady, my name intact. Maybe I wasn't innocent, but I was whole. And in a world that tried to carve women into manageable shapes, that felt like the closest thing to a miracle I'd ever painted. The applause still rang in my ears as I stepped out into the chilled night air, heels clicking against marble. The gallery lights spilled onto the pavement behind me like a soft afterglow, and someone inside was still talking about brushwork and symbolism and emotional texture, whatever that meant to them. All I knew was that my name had been printed on the glass in gold, and people had finally said it without asking who I was standing next to. Tonight, I was someone. They called my work daring, honest, unapologetic. They didn't know what it cost, but that was fine. Some prices aren't meant to be discussed. They're meant to be paid quietly. I took a slow breath, letting it settle in my chest. For once, it wasn't heavy. Across the street, headlights passed in waves. Laughter spilled out from a wine bar nearby. The city was moving around me, indifferent and electric. And that's when I saw him. Daniel. Not ruined, not in prison, not in tatters, just smaller. He leaned against a polished car, suit impeccable, but something in his posture sagged. The shine wasn't gone, but it had dulled, like a sculpture polished one too many times. Standing beside him was a girl, young, too young, barely 22 if that, her lipstick too bright, her laugh too eager. She wore vulnerability like perfume, obvious and sweet. My breath caught, not because I wanted him, God no, but because I recognized her, not by name, not by face, but by posture. By the way she tilted her head when he spoke, the way her shoulders curved slightly inward, like she was trying to fit into whatever version of herself he was already sculpting in his mind. She looked across the street for a moment, eyes scanning the sidewalk until they landed on me. Our eyes met. And nothing. No spark of recognition, no knowing look. To her, I was just a woman in a sleek black dress stepping out of a gallery. She didn't see the version of herself standing just 10 feet away. Then he turned toward her and said it. You look like someone who's healed through the hard stuff. My chest tightened. Same words, same cadence, same script. I closed my eyes. For a second. A full, heavy second. I could cross the street. I could call her over. I could pull her aside and whisper, "He's going to unravel you slowly. He'll call it love. It's not. Run." I could ruin him in her eyes before he had the chance to rewrite her worth in his. I could. But I didn't. Because I didn't survive him to chase ghosts. I didn't claw my way out to become the lighthouse for every woman still wandering his shore. That's not why I fought. That's not what I earned. I fought to return to myself, and she has to choose to fight too. Or not. Either way, it's her canvas now. So I turned. The wind tugged at the hem of my coat as I walked away, slow and certain. No flinch, no glance back. Because some art, some memories, some wars, some wounds, you don't frame, you burn. And tonight, I let the ashes go. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like silence, distance, and choosing not to go back just to prove a point. Mia's story reminds us, you don't owe closure to the one who broke you. You owe peace to the one who survived. Now tell us, have you ever walked away from someone who thought you never would? Drop your story in the comments. Your voice might be the mirror someone else needs. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that don't just entertain, they understand you.